The house was quiet except for the low hum of the kettle in the kitchen, a normal Sunday afternoon that was supposed to be peaceful. I had settled into my armchair with my own cup of coffee, letting the warmth spread through me while I scrolled aimlessly through my phone. My daughter walked in with that sharp energy she often carried, her footsteps quick, her face already clouded with impatience. The air shifted the moment she appeared, like the calm before a storm. I could sense she wanted something, and I braced myself without even realizing it. She asked for my credit card, her tone casual at first, almost dismissive, as though it was a request I should naturally comply with. When I refused, her body stiffened, her eyes narrowed, and her voice sharpened. We had been through this dance before, her wanting more freedom, more money, more things she believed were her right to have, and me standing my ground, trying to teach her boundaries she always pushed against. Our conversations often carried that undercurrent of strain, love knotted with frustration, affection tangled with disappointment. I tried to explain, again, that the card was not a bottomless well of indulgence, that responsibility mattered more than appearances, but she didn't hear me. Or perhaps she refused to. Her voice rose, words tumbling out faster, louder, until her face flushed with anger. In that heated moment, when her frustration outpaced her ability to control it, she grabbed the coffee cup I had been sipping from and hurled its contents at me. The liquid hit my shirt, scalding my skin, dripping onto the floor, staining the carpet. For a moment, the world froze. The shock was so heavy it muted everything. The dripping sound of coffee, the smell of bitterness spreading in the air, the silence that followed her outburst. My breath caught in my chest as I stared at her, stunned by the physicality of her anger. It wasn't just words this time. It was action, violent and raw. I felt the sting on my skin. But the deeper burn was in my chest. My heart throbbed with betrayal, disbelief, and sorrow all at once. I searched her face for some flicker of regret, but she looked away, defiant, almost trembling with the power of what she had done. The silence between us felt louder than any shouting could have been. In that moment, I realized something fundamental had cracked in our bond. I didn't move right away. I sat there, coffee dripping down, heart sinking lower, while she crossed her arms and turned her face away as though she had won something. The weight of the act pressed down on me, and I felt both hollow and overwhelmed at the same time. This was more than an argument. This was a breaking point, a moment that could not be undone. When I think back to how this all began, it is hard to believe that the same little girl I once held in my arms with trembling hands could now be the young woman who threw coffee at me. From the very first moment I laid eyes on her, I was overwhelmed with a mix of awe and terror. Awe, because she was perfect in her tiny form, with clenched fists and a cry that shook the room. Terror, because I felt an enormous responsibility pressing down on me. I was now someone's protector, guide, and teacher. I promised myself then that I would do everything in my power to raise her with love and provide her with a good life. Her childhood years were, in many ways, idyllic. I remember her first steps across the living room floor, wobbling toward me with a squeal of triumph. I remember the way she clung to my leg when she was nervous, hiding her face in my trousers whenever strangers visited. She was sweet, affectionate, and endlessly curious. There were nights I stayed up reading fairy tales to her, even when I was too tired to keep my eyes open, simply because the sound of her laughter as I acted out silly voices was worth it. There were mornings when she'd crawl into my bed, hair in tangles, clutching her stuffed toy, asking questions about the world that both amused and humbled me. As a parent, I tried to strike a balance in my approach. I wasn't the strict disciplinarian some of my own elders had been with me, but I wasn't indulgent either. I believed in rules, yes, but I also believed in explanations. If I said no, I tried to explain why. If she broke a rule, I wanted her to understand the reason behind the punishment. My hope was to raise her with both discipline and empathy, to make her not only obedient but thoughtful. Looking back now, I wonder if perhaps I erred too much on the side of explanation and not enough on the firmness of boundaries. Sometimes I wonder if she mistook my patience for weakness. As she grew older, subtle signs of entitlement began to show. At first, they seemed harmless, The tantrum over not getting the toy she wanted at the store, the sulking when a birthday gift wasn't exactly the one she had pictured. I brushed these off as ordinary parts of childhood, moments every child goes through. I told myself she would grow out of them with guidance. But as the years passed, those little flashes of greed and defiance started to stretch into patterns. I recall one incident clearly. She was invited to a friend's birthday party when she was about 12. She begged me to buy her an expensive dress to wear, something well beyond what was reasonable. When I gently declined and suggested a more modest outfit, she screamed at me that I was ruining her life. At the time, it seemed like the exaggerated drama of preteen years, but I felt a sting of unease. It wasn't just disappointment in her voice, it was fury, as if I had committed a grave injustice by refusing her. Another time, when she was in high school, she demanded the newest phone on the market. Many of her classmates had it, she said, and she didn't want to be left out. When I explained that her current phone was working perfectly fine and that we didn't need to chase every new trend, she went silent for days. The coldness in her attitude was more painful than her shouting ever could be. I see now that entitlement had been building like a slow fire, fueled by the culture around her, friends, social media, and a world that constantly told her she deserved more, newer, better. And though I tried to hold the line, there were moments I caved in, moments I handed her what she wanted simply because I didn't have the strength for another argument. I told myself I was choosing peace, but in truth, I was only feeding the problem. Now, when I look back at the arc of our story, I can see the warning signs I ignored. The daughter who once looked at me with admiration and trust slowly began to see me as an obstacle between her and the things she desired. And though my love for her never wavered, I began to feel the distance growing. Each argument, each demand, each act of defiance pushed us a little further apart. By the time we reached the coffee incident, perhaps the cracks had already spread so deep that it was only a matter of time before something broke. She was always a girl of contrasts, and as she moved into her teenage years, those contrasts only grew sharper. On the surface, she was charming, outgoing, and full of life. She had a quick wit that could make her friends laugh effortlessly, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that drew people in. Teachers often said she was bright and capable, but at home, that same confidence sometimes flared into arrogance. What began as innocent self-assurance transformed into something more demanding, as though she believed the world owed her everything she desired. Teenage years are hard for any child. I know that. There is the storm of emotions, the endless search for identity, the constant measuring of oneself against peers. But in her case, it seemed magnified by the environment she lived in. Friends became her compass, and the approval of her peers became more valuable to her than the approval of her family. If a friend had a new gadget, she had to have one. If someone wore a certain brand of shoes, she insisted on the same, dismissing anything less as worthless. Social media amplified this pressure 100-fold. Her phone never left her side, the endless stream of images and videos painting a world of luxury, beauty, and indulgence. She began to measure her worth by what she owned, not who she was. Likes on her pictures, comment from friends, the latest trends. These became the currency of her self-esteem. I noticed how carefully she curated her appearance before going out, how anxious she became if she thought her outfit was not on point. Even casual family dinners became a stage for her to test out styles and take pictures, as though nothing was real unless it could be shared online. Her materialistic desires were not small ones. She didn't ask for ordinary things. She wanted the most expensive items, the most sought-after labels. When she was 15, she begged me for a designer handbag that cost more than what I spent on groceries for a month. When I hesitated, she threw back at me that everyone else had something similar. Of course, everyone else often meant a handful of classmates whose parents indulged their every whim. Another time, she insisted on a lavish birthday party at a venue far beyond our budget, complete with decorations, catering, and professional photography, because she wanted to make a statement among her friends. There were smaller but equally telling moments too. She would come home from the mall with a sulky expression if I had refused to buy her the newest shoes. She once cried for hours when I declined to upgrade her phone, despite the fact that her current one worked perfectly fine. And yet, I also remember how quickly her anger evaporated when I finally gave in, her smile returning the moment she held the item in her hands, as though possession itself was the only balm for her dissatisfaction. Peer pressure was at the heart of much of this. I could see how deeply she wanted to fit in, how terrified she was of being seen as less than by her social circle. Her friends' opinions mattered more to her than mine ever could during those years. She often compared our home, our car, our lifestyle to those of her wealthier classmates, throwing my efforts into the shadows by reminding me of what others had. Social media was relentless in feeding this insecurity, showing her polished snapshots of luxury that made ordinary life seem dull and unfair. What troubled me most was not just the demands themselves, but the mindset they revealed. She seemed to equate love with gifts, respect with indulgence. If I said no, she saw it as rejection, as proof that I didn't care for her enough. No amount of reasoning could convince her that boundaries were not neglect but responsibility. She wanted to live in a world without limits, and anyone who stood in her way, even me, her parent, became the enemy in her eyes. By the time she reached young adulthood, this pattern was ingrained. The little girl who once found joy in simple bedtime stories now believed happiness came with a price tag, and each unreasonable demand, each battle over money, chipped away at the bond between us, leaving behind not just frustration but a growing fear in me that I was losing her to a world that valued possessions more than people. Money in our household was never just about numbers on a bank statement. It carried weight, meaning, and sometimes conflict. My credit card, in particular, became more than a piece of plastic. It was a symbol, one that represented control, authority, and boundaries. To me, it was the tool I used to manage our needs, to ensure bills were paid, food was on the table, and emergencies were covered. To her, it looked like a key to freedom, a magic pass that could unlock every desire without consequence. Every time she asked for it, it felt less like a request and more like a challenge, a test of who held the power in our home. We were not a wealthy family, though we were not struggling in the strictest sense either. I had worked hard to provide a comfortable life, one where my daughter never had to go without essentials. We had a decent home, reliable meals, and the occasional treats, a vacation once in a while, gifts on birthdays, and dinners out to celebrate milestones. But there was always a line, invisible but firm, between enough and excess. I knew too well the value of every dollar, having grown up in a household where money was tight, where my own parents had to make sacrifices daily to keep us afloat. That history shaped me into someone careful, sometimes cautious, about spending. I wanted to give my daughter more than I had, but not so much that she would lose her sense of appreciation. Historically, money in our family was treated with respect. We saved before we spent. We discussed big purchases openly. I tried to involve her in those conversations as she grew older, hoping she would see that money was not limitless, that choices had to be made and priorities set. When we bought new furniture, for example, I explained why we chose durability over glamour. When we skipped a vacation one year, I showed her the numbers, hoping she would understand it wasn't stinginess but responsibility. Yet, despite these efforts, she often saw only the denial, not the reasoning. Her perspective on money diverged sharply from mine. To her, luxuries weren't luxuries at all. They were entitlements, markers of her worth in the world. She believed she deserved the newest clothes, the latest phone, the trendiest accessories, simply because others had them. The word no felt to her like an insult, as if I was denying her value as a person. She equated material possessions with love, and every refusal was interpreted as a lack of care. It broke my heart to realize that the very boundaries I set out of love, to teach her responsibility, to protect her from the dangers of excess, were seen by her as proof of rejection. In her eyes, money was not about survival, security, or planning for the future. It was about status, belonging, and control over her own image. And so, each time she reached for my credit card, it was not just about buying an item. It was about claiming independence and testing authority. To her, the card meant freedom, and my refusal to hand it over meant confinement. That constant clash turned money into the sharpest wedge in our household, carving deeper divisions between us with every argument. It began like so many of our arguments had before, with what seemed at first like a simple request. She entered the room holding her phone, her face lit with a mixture of excitement and determination. I recognized the look immediately, the look she always wore when she wanted something she knew I might not be willing to give. This time, it was about a shopping trip with her friends. A new boutique had opened downtown, and according to her, everyone was going there that weekend to pick up clothes and accessories. She wanted my credit card so she could go along, spend freely, and come back with bags of things that, in her mind, weren't just purchases but proof that she belonged. She tried to frame it casually, as though it wasn't a big deal. "It's just a few things," she said, waving her hand as if dismissing the seriousness of it. "Everyone's going, and I don't want to be the only one left out. It's not even about the clothes, it's about the experience." But I knew better. I could already imagine the racks of overpriced items, the salespeople flattering her, the moment her friends would flash their cards or cash, and her desire to keep pace. It wasn't about an experience. It was about status, and she wanted me to foot the bill. I paused before answering, measuring my words. I had learned over the years that my first reaction mattered. Too firm a no, and she would explode. Too soft a hesitation, and she would sense an opening. "I understand you want to go," I said slowly. "But the credit card is not for shopping sprees. It's for bills, emergencies, and necessities. If you want to buy something, you can use your allowance or save up." The shift in her face was immediate. The brightness dimmed, replaced by a scowl that tightened her jaw. "Allowance," she snapped. "Do you even know how embarrassing it is to show up with barely anything while my friends are buying whatever they want? I can't just go there and look like a loser." Her words stung, not because of the insult, but because of what it revealed, how much of her self-worth was tangled up in appearances and possessions. I tried to reason with her, to explain. It's not about looking like anyone else. You don't need expensive things to prove yourself. Real friends don't care what you wear or what you buy. But she wasn't listening. She never did in these moments. Her voice rose, sharp and cutting. "That's easy for you to say. You don't understand what it's like to be my age right now. You don't know how cruel people can be if you don't keep up. You just sit here and preach while I have to live it." I could feel the tension building, like a storm pressing against the windows. I stayed calm, though my heart was pounding. "I'm not giving you the card," I said firmly. "I'm sorry, but it's not happening. I won't put myself in debt or teach you the wrong lesson just so you can impress people. If you really want those things, find a way to earn them." Her anger surged like a wave breaking. She stood taller, her face flushed with frustration, her voice trembling as it grew louder. "You're so selfish. Do you even love me? Every time I ask for something, you make me feel like I'm begging for scraps. Other parents want their kids to be happy, but you just want me to suffer." The accusation pierced me deeper than I expected. Love was the foundation of everything I did, and to hear her twist my refusals into proof of neglect was unbearable. Still, I held my ground. "I love you enough to say no," I replied, my voice quieter but unshakable. "I love you enough to teach you that money isn't magic and that you don't always get what you want." Her fists clenched at her sides, and I could see the battle raging inside her. She wanted control, and my refusal made her feel powerless. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if we were both trapped in the moment with no escape. She began pacing, her words spilling out in a torrent. "You don't get it. You never get it. You want to control me, to make me live like you did, with nothing. Well, I'm not you. I deserve better than this, better than your stingy rules." I knew then that reasoning was useless. She wasn't hearing me. She was drowning in her own anger. Still, I stayed steady, refusing to be swept away by her storm. "No," I said again, simply and firmly. "The answer is no." That final refusal snapped something inside her. I saw it in her eyes, the way they hardened, the way her mouth set in a tight line. She grabbed the coffee cup sitting on the table between us, her movements sudden and sharp, and before I could react, she flung its contents at me. The hot liquid splashed across my chest and face, the shock of it stunning me into silence. The room went quiet except for the sound of my breath, ragged and shallow, as I looked at her in disbelief. She stood there, chest heaving, eyes wild with anger and fear, as if she herself couldn't quite believe what she had just done. And in that moment, I knew we had crossed a threshold. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't just about a credit card. It was about respect, control, and the breaking of something fragile that might never be whole again. It happened in a flash, so quickly that I barely had time to register it before the coffee was already on me. One moment we were standing locked in a battle of words, her chest heaving, her fists clenched, her voice ringing in my ears. The next, her hand darted toward the mug that sat on the table, the motion sharp and almost instinctive, like an animal striking when cornered. She didn't pause to think, didn't hesitate. With one fierce movement, she hurled it in my direction. The liquid struck first, hot, bitter, stinging against my skin. I gasped, not from pain alone but from the sheer shock of it. The force of her anger had taken a physical form, and I was its target. My shake clung to me instantly, soaked and heavy, the heat seeping through to my chest. A few drops splashed up into my face, stinging my cheek, sliding down toward my jaw. The mug itself clattered to the floor, spinning once before coming to rest on its side, the sound oddly hollow in the sudden silence. In that instant, my mind raced in 1,000 directions at once. How could she, my daughter, the same child I once soothed to sleep when nightmares woke her, the girl whose scraped knees I had kissed better, whose tears I had wiped away, she had chosen to hurt me, not with words this time but with action. I wondered if she understood what she had done, if she grasped how deeply the act cut, or if she only saw it as an outburst, a release of rage she couldn't contain. The sting on my skin was sharp, but the sting in my chest was far worse. If anyone else had been there, they would have seen a scene frozen in time. Me standing rigid, coffee dripping down my shirt in uneven lines, her standing opposite me, her face a mixture of defiance and shock. Her eyes darted away for a second, then back to me, as though even she couldn't believe what had just happened. For a brief moment, I thought I saw regret flicker across her features, but it was smothered quickly by the armor of anger she had worn for so long. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the faint dripping of coffee from the edge of the table to the floor. No words were spoken, no apologies, no further accusations. Just silence so thick it felt like another presence in the room. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, louder than anything else. Inside, I felt a strange mix of emotions, layered one on top of the other. There was disbelief. How had it come to this? There was hurt, raw and heavy, at the realization that my own child had lashed out at me this way. And underneath it all, there was a quiet, simmering sorrow, the kind that seeps deep into your bones and tells you that something fundamental has been broken. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, to ask her why. But the words caught in my throat. I didn't trust my own voice, didn't trust that I could speak without breaking down completely. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, staring at her. And she, for her part, did not apologize, did not soften. She folded her arms across her chest, her chin lifting slightly, as though daring me to react. It was in that silence, in that unbearable stillness, that I realized the depth of the divide between us. This was no longer the heat of a typical argument, no longer just teenage rebellion. It was something harsher, colder. The coffee had been a weapon, and with it she had drawn a line between us that neither of us could ignore. The room remained still for a long moment after, both of us trapped in disbelief. The stain on my shirt, the spreading puddle on the floor, the bitter smell of coffee in the air, all of it seemed to etch the moment into permanence. Even without words, I knew this would be the memory that lingered, the point to which I would always look back and say, "Hey, here's where everything changed." The first sensation was anger, sharp and overwhelming, rising through me like fire. My chest burned not only from the sting of the hot liquid, but from the insult behind it. Never in all my years of parenting had I imagined my daughter would cross that invisible line between words and violence. The anger came so fast it startled me, my fists clenching, my jaw tightening, as though my body was preparing to lash back. But then, almost in the same breath, anger gave way to sadness, a heavy sorrow that dropped into my stomach like a stone. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the meaning behind it. This was my child, the one I had raised, the one I had sacrificed for, the one whose happiness I had made my life's purpose. And now here I was, dripping with the bitter remnants of her fury. Humiliation followed quickly after. The heat of the coffee faded, but the awareness of what had happened stayed, prickling at my skin. It wasn't just that she had disrespected me. It was that she had done so in a way that left me exposed and vulnerable. My shirt clung damply to my body, stained dark brown in irregular patches. The floor was a mess, sticky with liquid that spread outward in a widening pool. My hands trembled as I looked at the wreckage around me, not sure if I should clean it or simply collapse into the chair and give in to the weight pressing down on me. Across from me, she stood like a storm that hadn't fully passed. Her breathing was uneven, her face still flushed. At first, her expression was pure defiance, chin raised, arms crossed tightly across her chest. It was the look of someone who believed she had won, who refused to be the first to break. But there was something else, too, a flicker in her eyes that suggested even she was surprised by her own action. For a moment, I thought I saw guilt pass across her face, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by a cold indifference. She wouldn't let me see weakness. She wouldn't let me think she regretted it, even if she did. The physical mess around us seemed almost like a mirror of the emotional chaos inside me. Coffee streaked the table, dripped down onto the carpet, leaving dark stains that I knew would be difficult to remove. My clothes were ruined for the day, the smell of bitter coffee clinging stubbornly. The mug lay on its side, a silent witness to what had just unfolded, its chipped edge marking the violence of her throw. What should have been a quiet, ordinary moment in our home was destroyed, replaced by a scene of chaos and hurt. And yet, as I stood there, I couldn't help but feel the weight of symbolism in it all. The hot coffee wasn't just liquid, it was emotion made tangible. It was her anger, boiling over, impossible to contain. It was the heat of years of tension between us, suddenly erupting and spilling everywhere, staining everything it touched. It was passion turned destructive, love twisted into something unrecognizable. Just as the coffee burned my skin, her action burned a place inside me I wasn't sure would ever heal. I tried to speak, but the words felt foreign, useless. What could I possibly say? That she had crossed a line? She already knew. That she had hurt me? She had wanted to. That she had broken something? She would not admit it. So I said nothing, standing in silence as the seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Eventually, she turned away, muttering something under her breath. Whether it was an excuse, an accusation, or an attempt at justification, I couldn't even make out. What lingered was the sound of her footsteps as she left the room, leaving me alone with the mess. I stood for a long time before moving, staring at the puddle on the floor, the stains on my clothes, and realizing that nothing about this moment could be undone. The coffee would dry, the stains might fade, but the memory of it, the humiliation, the anger, the sorrow, would stay. And as I knelt down with a rag to clean the mess, a painful thought struck me. Perhaps this was what our relationship had become. Me constantly wiping away the evidence of her outbursts, trying to put the pieces back together, even as more cracks appeared. The more I tried to clean, the more I felt the futility of it. Some stains never come out. When I think back, I realize the coffee incident was not an isolated explosion. It was the culmination of years of smaller arguments, moments I dismissed as phases, things I convinced myself she would eventually outgrow. The truth is, there had always been cracks in the foundation, tiny fractures that widened over time because I chose not to confront them as firmly as I should have. I remember when she was 10 and begged for a pair of shoes that were far too expensive. They were the kind every other girl in her class seemed to have, brightly colored, plastered with a brand name that held more value to her than the shoes themselves. When I told her they were too costly, she stomped her feet, shouted that I was ruining her life, and slammed her bedroom door so hard the frame rattled. I laughed nervously at the time, telling myself all children have tantrums. But deep down, I felt the sting of disrespect. Instead of addressing it head-on, I let it slide, thinking it would pass. Later, as a young teenager, she developed a habit of dismissing me when I spoke. If I offered advice or correction, she would roll her eyes, sigh dramatically, and mutter under her breath. Once, during a family gathering, she openly contradicted me in front of relatives, snapping that I didn't know what I was talking about. I remember the heat rising in my cheeks, the embarrassment of being undermined by my own child in front of others. Yet afterward, I didn't press the issue. I told myself she was just testing boundaries, that it was part of growing up. Patterns began to emerge, patterns I should have taken more seriously. There was the time she borrowed my wallet without asking, insisting later that it wasn't stealing because she had intended to tell me. Another time, she stayed out much later than we had agreed upon, ignoring the curfew I had set. And when she returned home, she brushed off my anger with a casual shrug. Each time, I delivered a lecture, but there were rarely consequences beyond a few stern words. I thought my reasoning would sink in, that she would reflect and change. Instead, what I unknowingly taught her was that boundaries could be tested, crossed, and stretched without lasting repercussions.